Welcome to this episode of, Not So Nerdy Actuary. So today I have with me Chelsea. Hi Chelsea, welcome to the show. Can you tell us a bit about yourself?
Of course. Hey Harsh, thanks so much for inviting me. Like you said, my name is Chelsea Adler. I currently work for a startup insurance company called Root. As a pricing manager and actuary, really focused on working with departments of insurance to get our rates approved so that we can write business and write policies in all the states. So I would say the main focus for our company is mobile telematics. So we use how people drive to determine how much they pay for their auto insurance.
Interesting. So why did you choose an actuarial career?
Yeah, so I would say my answer is probably similar to a lot of folks in the sense that I loved math and statistics, and that's a pretty big part of the job. However, I would say the other big reason is I love the combination of individual work as in addition to how collaborative it is and getting to work with others to achieve, common goals.
And why did you choose a P&C above life, health, or pension domain? If you can enlighten us a bit.
Yeah. So it's definitely no secret that technology is just rapidly changing the world. And as cars evolve and smart homes are emerging, the insurance industry is having to adapt to these changing needs and expectations of society. And so working in P&C, there are endless opportunities to take on new challenges. And I just think it's really fun to develop new products and really rewarding to create innovative solutions to what might seem impossible solutions or impossible problems for home and auto being very tangible and products that impact such a large number of people.
Do you think P&C being short-term contracts other than term being long contracts give it a bit of flexibility and make it more of a fun thing to do compared to?
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, so life insurance does tend to be a lot, longer tailed, and we do for auto, typically at least semi-annual rate revisions. Home is, at least annual, maybe more often. And so I would say that contributes to it being a much more dynamic environment where things are just constantly changing, both in the industry and the world, but then also just we have to react quickly to those changes and adjust the rating plans accordingly.
I completely agree to that. P&C is a lot of fun that way. So what are a few lessons which you learned during your actuarial journey, starting from when you started your career to where you are right now? If you can take us through a few challenges and which you have faced and important lessons which you learned out of them.
Yeah. So I was really trying to think back to when I started my journey and some things that I would either want to do differently or that I feel worked out really well for me. And there were three main pieces of advice that I would give other aspiring actuaries. So the first is to volunteer for everything. Seriously, try to get exposure to as much different work as possible early on. I think this is really helpful for two main reasons. One, you're going to be able to develop your skills a lot quicker and become well-rounded if you just, get exposure to a lot of things quickly. And then it also helps you sort of discern, what do you actually like to do and what don't you like as much? And that can help sort of direct the course of your career going forward. The second piece of advice, I think this is maybe a challenge for some folks in the actuarial profession because I would say in general, actuaries tend to be a little bit more introverted, and I'm definitely a self-proclaimed introvert. But it is so important to speak up early in your career. So not just asking questions when you have them, but putting yourself out there in team meetings and not being afraid of being wrong or saying the wrong thing, and just having your voice be heard is really going to help establish you as a leader among your peers and really going to help you stand out to the leadership that you're working with. And that will open doors as well. And then I think the last piece of advice is just always do your best work. Even in the small things, be consistently excellent, because your manager or those around you aren't going to be able to give you more challenging or exciting work if they can't trust you to do the small things well. And so if they can see that you're consistently doing, really, really strong work, then it's going to more quickly provide opportunities for you to take on more and exciting things. So I think those three are just like super important for any like beginning actuary or just any professional who's starting their journey.
Completely agree. But do you think as you start your journey, as important as it is to be a good speaker and to speak yourself out, is it important to be a good listener as well at the same point of time? Considering the type of work you do when you start your career, is it like one of the most important things to be a good listener as well?
Oh, that is such a great point. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's super important to not only speak up, but to be a good listener. And you should definitely like be a sponge when you're first starting out. Not only listen well, but I highly recommend taking a bunch of notes. I personally can barely remember what I had for breakfast the morning of. So like, it's just super important for me to write everything down so that, as you're learning more and more, even if you don't remember all the details, you can go back really easily and quickly and kind of pick up with where you started before. So I think that's just an expectation that once you're taught something once, you should really be able to run with it. So definitely listen well and take notes.
That as well. So, what does your typical day look like? And just a sub question to that: do you think, according to your experience, against the general notion, is the actuarial work collaborative? Because a lot of people think that actuaries kind of solve problems which do not exist. So, I mean, what do you think about that?
Yeah. So what does a typical day look like? Well, first of all, there isn't one. I think most actuaries will tell you that. In fact, I actually launched a blog specifically about this, just trying to kind of give a representative sample of like a lot of the different activities that I do. But I think that's one of the most fun parts of being an actuary is every day is different. So there's just a ton of variety. But in a nutshell, I'll share a couple of the big ticket items that I spend the most time on. The first is I have a pretty big team here at Root. And so I spend a lot of time just kind of like leading projects, answering questions that they have, coordinating different like timelines and work with different stakeholders across the business. We work really closely with our data science team, our engineers, our legal partners. And so it's just, to your, earlier question about collaboration, it's extremely collaborative. We're always working with different folks outside of just our team. And then really, another really important part of my job is just developing the individuals and allowing them to have opportunities to grow and flourish here at Root. And so just kind of having conversations around like, what do you want to achieve over your career and where do you want to go and how are we going to get there? So I really love those conversations a lot. And then, as I mentioned earlier, we partner closely with departments of insurance. And so I am pretty regularly on the phone with different folks that work at these DOIs to help get our filings approved and answer whatever questions they have. And then I would say the last big responsibility for my team is doing analysis to assess overall rate level changes. And so, how much do we need to move base rates up or down to meet our overall profit targets for the particular lines of business in the different states? So those are kind of the big ticket items, but there's a lot more than that. So check out my blog if you want to know more.
There is a link in the description below to the blog. You can go and check it out there. So as a pricing actuary, there are a lot of assumptions which you would be dealing on a daily basis. And then how difficult is it to kind of put across those assumptions to someone who doesn't understand it at that level? and how important does communication play a big role there when you are kind of dealing with telling other people what your assumptions are. So I mean, how important a part as of assumption is when you deal with people on daily basis, communication and assumptions. I mean, how important is it as a pricing actuary on a daily basis?
Yeah, I personally think that communication is probably one of the most important skills of being an actuary. And when you talk about assumptions, that makes me think about just how, as an actuary, whenever you're predicting the future, you're always going to be wrong to some degree, and you're just trying to get as close to the right answer as possible. And there are a lot of things you have to assume to be able to get the models to work and predict the future. And so it's so critical for us when we communicate out to the leaders of the company and people making decisions based on the analysis that we run, that they understand the level of uncertainty in these estimates. That, just because this is the point estimate of what we think the results could be, there's this wide of a range of uncertainty, and these are the possible scenarios that could happen. I think that's critical, especially when decisions you're making that impact the business in such a big way are based on the data and the analysis that we're doing. So we really do have to communicate based on whoever it is that we're working with in as clear of a way as possible, and just kind of disclose any assumptions that we do make so that they're aware.
I completely agree to that. It's very critical to make sure that whoever you're communicating to understand it in a proper way, and not just the way so there's a lot of chance of miscommunication when you communicate something. So it's very important to take that part away from it, and it's very, very important. So what do you think are a few important skills which the younger actuaries, specifically those just entering the actuarial profession or are into the actuarial profession for like just a year or so, what are some few important skills which you think they should have or try to upskill themselves in while they're in the early part of their career?
Yeah. So I think the common ones are, obviously a really strong foundation in math and statistics. Those are really core. It's also becoming increasingly important that you have strong technical skills. So being able to, work with different programming languages on the computer to be able to access and manipulate data to do the analysis that you do as an actuary. But then some of the maybe less commonly talked about skills, I would say the first one is adaptability. I talked earlier about how, the P&C industry is constantly changing and technology is constantly revolutionizing things. And so there's just there's so much change going on. You have to be able to move quickly and adjust to changes. And that's just such an important thing, not just for being an actuary, but for so many professions right now. And then I think early on, ability to learn quickly is a super important skill. So just knowing yourself and how you learn, and being proactive to ask questions, take notes, and just be intentional to kind of learn everything you can as quickly as possible. And then lastly, of course, as we've talked about quite a bit, communication is super, super important in every level of being an actuary. So just, I think, putting yourself in positions where you can practice communicating with others, whether that's different clubs or just, practicing in the mirror, that's going to really, really help set you up for success in the long run. And then while I wouldn't say that this is a skill per se, but something that's really a desirable trait, especially early on, is passion for the work. If you're really excited about what you're trying to accomplish, you're probably going to be more successful at it. That's maybe interviewing you or the people that you're working with, that you're committed to, doing the work well and working hard. I think that will also go a long way.
Well, agree to that completely as well. So we've been talking about communication a lot during this time in the past 5 minutes or so. So I mean, just for the benefit of people viewing it, what exactly is communication when we say? Is it preparing presentations and drafting them? Is it data visualization? Is it choosing the right words? Or is it the mix of everything? I mean, what exactly is communication? Is what I would like you to tell people. That what exactly do you mean when you say you should have good communication skills?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's everything you just mentioned. So there's the obvious like different types of communication. So there's like face to face speaking communication. There's written communication, whether that's via email or Slack or whatever you use to correspond at work. And then there are more like formal presentations where maybe you have some sort of visual that you're showing to your audience. I think in all of those different realms, the most important thing is to know your audience. Like, who are you communicating to? What do they know and where are they coming from? So making sure to kind of cater your language to, what they understand and what they're used to. And then, at the end of the day, what are you hoping to accomplish? Like, what is the decision? And then really just filtering your communication style through all of those different elements to hopefully make it as effective as possible.
There are a lot of times when we as an actuary communicate with non-technical audience who do not understand the technicalities of it. So what is that one important thing which you would say is very important to keep in mind while you're communicating with the audience which is not so technically aware of about what you're actually doing?
Yeah. So I always try to approach things from the perspective of like, okay, if I was going to tell my sister or my mom or dad, what I'm trying to communicate in this, meeting or presentation, how would I explain it to them? Because they, aren't actuaries and don't have the background that I do. So I think it's best to typically start at like that highest level. And as people grasp that and have questions, you can dig deeper into the weeds. But I think I think a common mistake I see is people jump right into the details, and then the audience can kind of just disengage because they're overwhelmed and it's too much to take in because they're not deep into that analysis like you were. So really starting at the high level and then digging deeper as people have questions and kind of catch on. I have personally seen that work really effectively in my experience.
So we as an actuary are generally said to be bearer of a bad news. So we so I mean there are obviously some biases which people have when they are looking at something. So for example, whenever you're going to someone, let's say an underwriter who has a general idea about how his line of business is performing or how he is performing in general, and then you do a bit of analysis, and then you come up with a certain analysis which they don't want to hear or they are not expecting, or it's against what they are expecting to hear. So how do you kind of go and communicate such things to them? Because it is one of the most difficult things of which is a part of your job and you need to do it. So how do you kind of approach that?
Yeah, I'm really glad you said this because so my dad is an insurance agent. And when I first decided to become an actuary, he basically just joked that like we're sales inhibitors because we cause all sorts of problems for agents when we raise rates. And, just that, generally speaking, folks on the sales side of things or underwriters don't always see things the same way that we do because we do to some degree have differing objectives or goals or focuses per se. So I think it's just important to go into those conversations being sensitive to the goals of the other person. So, our data may tell one story and their data may tell another. And it's important to be able to kind of reconcile those differences. I mean, first of all, hopefully you are taking the data from the same source. And so you should be able to kind of identify like, why are you coming to different conclusions? So data integrity is super, super important. If you don't have that, that's going to be a big problem. But then after that, yeah, just like also coming into it from the perspective that like you're two human beings trying to do your jobs to the best of your ability and achieve, at the end of the day, the common goal is to have your company be as successful as possible and to take care of the customer. And so how can you sort of, meet in the middle to achieve that and to, just like work together? I mean, again, it goes back to the whole like predicting the future. Like there's not one perfect right answer. And so there is this level of uncertainty and there's room sometimes to kind of meet in the middle or compromise for a lot of the work that we do.
And sometimes you do also get some weird requests from some people. So has it ever happened to you that someone has come up with a request and then you explain to them why it should not be done this way? And they're like, yeah, okay, I know this makes perfect sense. I know this is logical, but that's not how I want it. So I'm sure you would have come across such scenarios. So how do you kind of deal with that if you've ever dealt with such a scenario?
Honestly, I can't think of a good example offhand, but I would say there have been situations where maybe over email something is proposed and I just do not agree with the approach. And I don't understand where this person's coming from or how they came to this conclusion. And so I think the most important thing to do at that point in time is to get face to face with that individual and talk it through. So often people go back and forth on email and things just get worse and worse. And I think it's important to just very early on, catch those kinds of things and sit down and talk to somebody and hear them out and understand where they're coming from. And you may get to the end of the conversation and agree to disagree. That's fine. But you're only going to make it more, just complicated and difficult if you don't have that conversation early on. So, I just think it all goes back to communication.
I guess that's why every actuarial standard of practice kind of hints towards communication at the end of the day, if you read them through properly. So, but how do you think the role of an actuary evolves when they start as a younger actuary to when they reach a higher or a senior position? So, what are some differences which you need to evolve through, and what are the major things which change once you're a junior actuary and once you become a higher actuary as an actuarial manager or a senior actuary who is involved more with the boards and other stakeholders?
Yeah, I think the biggest transition is really, when you're starting out, you're generally going to be really deep in the weeds of analysis, and you might have like a single project or very few like main focuses that you're going really in depth on. And you become kind of the expert in those kind of niche areas. And then as you progress in your career, generally, as you take on more leadership responsibility, you're going to have a wider scope of projects or just different work that you have your hand on. And you're not going to have the capacity to dig as deep into some of these analyses that you were doing previously. And it becomes increasingly important that you understand the business at a higher level and how the work and decisions that you make impact the company as a whole. And so I think just, again, as you progress, it gets a little bit less detailed and a little bit more big picture and strategic in terms of the work that you're doing.
And I'm sure for that, people need a lot of inspiration. And if you are looking for some inspiration, you can probably go check out on Instagram, Inspiring Actuaries, and you'll get a lot of inspiration out there, I'm sure.
Thank you.
Moving on, as a last question, what is an advice you would like to give to your younger self or to the younger actuaries who are watching this? I mean, what is an advice which you would like to give?
Yeah. So I think the biggest piece of advice I would have is to just remind yourself that there are far more important things in life than success at work or on actuarial exams. To be honest, I really struggled with this, partially because I really love what I do. But at the end of the day, I realized that I would much prefer to love people well, and live out the calling that I feel like I've been given for my life than to be the best actuary that there ever was. And so just, really encourage people to take the time to step back and consider, what do you want your life to really be about? And focus more on who you're becoming as opposed to what you're achieving. And I think that will help kind of put everything into perspective. You'll enjoy the journey more, and you'll probably end up, in a better place than you would have otherwise.
I guess it's all about letting go as well and not being stuck with something. You give an exam, you might pass, you might fail. Even if you fail an exam, it's about letting go, I guess, and then moving ahead. If you are stuck on that, I guess it will not take you anywhere, either professionally or personally. So I think that's very, very important. But thank you so much for your time, Chelsea. It was amazing to have you here. Thank you so much. And I'll put a link of her blog in the description. Go check that out. And if you like this video and you want more such type of content, please like, share, and subscribe this channel. See you in the next episode of Not So Nerdy Actuary.